Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. I'm really excited for this conversation. We have such an eclectic group with us here today, but I think they all, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think they all have the same general goal, which is to improve the quality of higher ed and to ensure more students, particularly those who have been underrepresented, get their degrees. So I wanted to throw a kind of intentionally vague question at all of you, and I'm sure you all have an opinion, so anyone can chime in. But do you think the traditional idea of college, whatever you think that is broken?
I don't think it's broken. I just think it's no longer the norm for most students.
I would say that I think the traditional notion of college being a bastion of middle-class values and being designed for middle-class families, I think it no longer reflects that. And so what we have to do now is design models that incorporate the reality of the students' lives that we are currently serving.
I would agree with Michael. It's not broken, but it's not the reality for most students. And so, it works well for those students who follow that path, but most students will not follow that path, so it's incumbent on us to think about that non-traditional path, which is not the norm, or which is the norm now for most students.
And I would say, maybe I'll go out on a limb and say it's parts of it are broken, right? If the people that I represent at the chamber, if employers are feeling like the students that are coming out of traditional higher ed are not prepared for the workforce, there's something wrong there, and we need to look at that and do better by the students.
And Cheryl, since I have you, and I'm going to start with you since you kind of represent the other side of the higher ed hump, the business side, the employment side. From your member organizations, from your colleagues, what do you hear are the skills or qualities that today's graduates seem to be lacking?
That's such I love that question, but it's such a hard one because it certainly depends on industry, right? And I think that, you definitely hear this notion of soft skills and employability skills are sort of lacking across the board. But, you think about it in computer science. I was having a conversation yesterday where some major members of ours, big companies that employ a lot of folks, are needing to go through a process of really identifying the competencies around computer science and data science because what is coming out of higher ed is not what they're looking for. And so that, I think, I don't want to sit here as the representative of employers and say it's all on higher ed. It certainly is not. And that's why we've sort of taken this on at the chamber to say, look, employers need to do a better job. So these particular employers are standing up and saying, okay, I'm not just going to point blame. I'm going to say this is what we need. These are the competencies we're looking for, and we're going to help build it.
Go on.
But on the employer question, we at Excelencia are very much focused on human capital and the marriage of Latino talent and the opportunities that are there. And one of the things that I've begun to understand about employers is that they're very much like traditional thinkers anywhere, and that they're accustomed to recruiting at certain institutions, they're accustomed to using their own personal networks. And so it's very much the same as the kinds of patterns that exist within institutions that are recruiting from only certain institutions. So I think that I'm not prepared to call anything broken because I'd like to go asset-based, but I do think that the opportunity for this conversation about human capital to really raise up from traditional patterns of referral and recruitment and really look at the way that talent can flow, that's the opportunity.
Sarita, now that I have you, you represent Latino students, which we all know are going to college in unprecedented numbers. They are getting into good schools, and half of them are in community colleges, half of them are in four-year institutions pretty much. But increasingly, it seems that the conversation needs to be around not just access, but completion, because we know that retention numbers, graduation numbers are still really low for Latinos. What sorts of services, programs do you think really benefit these students when it comes to getting those degrees?
Thank you for that question, and it really allows for a tag team with Scott's institution. At Excelencia, we have an inventory of practices which go from access and recruitment all the way through retention and graduation. And Increasingly, the investment that everybody makes to get in has to be married with the investment of completing. Just last night, we honored a program at Nova that is doing exactly that. So literally, I'm going to tag team and say, tell us about pathways to the baccalaureate.
Thanks for doing my job. Tell us about pathways.
Well, Nova, one of our roles, I think, is we scale opportunity. 31% of all the Hispanic Latino undergraduates in the Commonwealth of Virginia are at our institution, but many of them start in our roles. We reach out to all the public schools. We have counselors embedded in the public schools starting in the 10th grade, and so I think that's really, and it's a huge commitment on the part of our institution. My predecessor was the one who made that commitment, and my job is to make sure it keeps working, but that's the way we bring in students who have every capability to achieve in higher ed, but without that kind of commitment, that outreach, that unique form of working with students from the very beginning when they may not think about, or their families are not accustomed to that notion of thinking about higher ed, and then pulling them through, and then also partnering with our great senior institutions. 2/3 of those students will go to George Mason University, which has a very unique outlook. So one of the roles we play is we are a scalar of opportunity, but we're also the seam and seamless education, I think, at community colleges, which means we have to reach into the public schools and connect strongly with our four-year partners as well as with the workforce.
So that's a pretty large percentage of students who end up transferring to a four-year institution. How does that compare nationally for community colleges, students in general?
Well, I mean, I think if you look, most community college students, the numbers I've heard recently, 80% come with the intention of transferring. One of the things we have to be careful about is sometimes students end up in programs that don't transfer. So a lot of times they may not know what does not transfer, what does transfer, what's a workforce program that ends at a certain point. And so, while our students have come with all the capabilities to be successful college, they come with a different level of savviness about what that means. And I think that's where we have to work a little more diligently than with students who would go to a traditional college, where, to be quite honest, many times their parents have already figured all of that out for them. That's not the case with most of our students, and so we have to do things a little bit differently in different ways to make sure that that happens. That's why one of the great things for us is being able to have partners like George Mason, like George Washington in this area, who really reach with us to make that possible and make that inclusivity and accessibility for those students who ultimately want to reach that bachelor's degree. We're pathway colleges. We're not destination colleges, and that means we have to embrace that role as a pathway college, and when we work our best is we clear those pathways for our students, whether they want to go to a university or they want to go straight to the workplace.
What about the students who, an associate's degree is enough, they want to do their 2 years or what have you and go out and jump right into their careers? Where do you draw the line between the students who do have those 4-year goals and those who just want to get their associates and get out into the world?
Well, we never draw lines. I think that's that. We always encourage aspirations, but we certainly look for those students who have an aspiration to go straight into the workplace. And, one of the things for us too is we have so many students who are adult students. Our average age is 27. And so a lot of times for them, they're not thinking about a degree. They're thinking about getting a certain skill to get a foothold in the workplace, and then if we can bring them back in and then help them move forward in a degree, then they can move that to a career. We actually have a lot of 4-year students who come to us who, it's not that they discount their 4-year degree, but they need us almost as a finishing school. So you see that in healthcare programs, IT programs, biotech programs, where they need a skill set to get the foothold in the workplace, and that's another role that we play.
And I imagine for non-traditional students who are also parents, sometimes the community college model is more convenient or more
Oh, absolutely.
accessible.
I mean, most of our students work, and so they have to, that's why distance education is such a big role with community colleges.
Well, Michael, I haven't forgotten about you, and I know you represent a very unusual institution in a good way, and one that has actually gotten a lot of attention, including yourself. You've gotten a lot of attention. I read your Washington Monthly profile, which was really interesting. So tell us a little bit about your school and how you've kind of reformed it in the last few years.
Sure. Well, we actually have taken a contrarian approach to much of what is being discussed in higher education. We exist for a different principle. We believe that we should acknowledge the reality of the lives of the students we serve. With all due respect to the community college system, I don't think that's the magic elixir, right? I don't think that we should just be at the point in our lives where we say, we're going to dump all our problems into the community college systems.
We don't believe that either.
Right. No, and I don't think you do. No, I don't think they do, right? So what we have said is, look, 75 to 80% of the students currently enrolled in college work more than 20 hours a week, right? That is their reality. So if that's the case, then instead of saying it's okay for those students to work midnight shifts and to work jobs that are incompatible with their academic aims, why don't we incorporate their work reality into their aspirational reality? And so we created a system called the Urban Work College. And with that system, our students, we are the first urban work college in the country. Our students work between 10 to 20 hours a week and go to school. They get a work transcript and they get an academic transcript. And their work is designed to assist them in the areas that they are interested in pursuing once they graduate. Now, what this does is a number of things. Number one, it allows the students to no longer have to sacrifice their academic performance to meet their financial needs. Number two, it also acknowledges that for us, 85% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. If you come from a Pell Grant family and a Pell Grant family background, that means your family has had a dysfunctional relationship with work, all right? You either have been in a background where there is underemployment or long-term unemployment. So you don't have the relationships. You don't have the relationship with work where you look at it and you say, this is my career. I grew up in a family that did very, very well. We owned a restaurant. I learned because I would follow my dad to the bank or when he would go deal with the vendors. My mother ran a social work agency. I learned how to manage watching them. But if that's not your reality, how are you going to learn those things? And are we going to continue to say, well, maybe you can learn them incrementally? Or are we going to say, why don't we build that into your academic experience? So we've done that. We've given our students a way to compensate for what they came to us without. And we think that is an important role. Now, there are small urban colleges all over this country that could work with their partners in the business community to create internship opportunities for their students. Our students graduate having worked 4 years in places that they have a transcript that can show you what they've done and what they know. That combined with a rigorous liberal arts education gives them an advantage that they have a practical experience and they have an intellectual experience. Not that practical experiences aren't intellectual, I'm not, but what I am saying is that this to us makes the most sense. But this is just the latest thing that we've done. We have challenged the idea of affordability. We reduced tuition and fees by over $10,000, right? We created a model so that our students could graduate with less than $10,000 of debt. When our football program was a financial drain on the institution, we terminated the football program and turned the football field into an organic farm so that we could address the food desert issues in our community, right? We believe, no, thank you. Obviously, none of you are football fans. Right?
It's hard in Texas.
Right. It's hard in Texas. But my point with this is there is room in higher education to reimagine what we're doing. We also don't use textbooks, okay? We use open source educational materials, or we challenge our faculty to come up with materials that communicate the lesson plans. I mean, there are things you can do to reimagine the possibilities, but to do so, you have to turn around, face the communities you serve, acknowledge the issues that they are experiencing, and then decide that you want to deal with that instead of patting yourselves on the back for the size of your endowment.
Can I make a comment about that? Because I think, well, obviously everybody can see that in him, but to your first question about is college broken, there are many institutions that, much like employers, do things the same way they've done all the time and resist trying to find new ways. And so obviously leadership is key. So if you think about maybe what's broken, it's those institutions that are so ingrained in what they've always done and aren't willing to sort of innovate and try new things. Like
and you see that's why many of the liberal arts colleges are being shuttered, because they maybe clung on to those traditional models and weren't able to innovate. So Michael, this sounds like a fantastic school. I think, it's very appealing for all kinds of reasons, and I know students graduate with very little debt. It's about $10,000 on average or something, which is really quite low, and it's a historically black college, but also a very diverse student population. But at the end of the day, the outcomes that your students produce are still, they have room for improvement, right? The graduation rate is still pretty low.
Well, so I'm going to use my legal training to refute your argument, right? So this is the reality. When I joined Paul Quinn, we were a year away from closing. We were a completely broken institution. It was open enrollment. It was just completely dysfunctional. So we had a choice to make. We could skirt around at the edges, or we could attack the problem vigorously and wholeheartedly, right? We decided to attack the problem vigorously because in our mind, you stand behind your product, okay? So who we produce is who we're going to be judged by. We weren't good enough. We had accreditation challenges. So we went from 550 students to 150 students in 2 years, okay? Now, that basically tanked our graduation rate, all right? There's no way you can spin it. There's no way you can do anything about it. It is what it is, all right? Except for a funny thing happened, right? While we were down, we decided to implement all of our changes. So all the things we're being praised for now, that's when we started implementing them. If you want to know who we are, judge us by our 70% retention rate. A 70% retention rate with students who are 85% are Pell Grant students, 70% have zero expected family contributions, right? So I would submit to you that what we have is a lagging indicator problem, right? The school we were, that's the reality of it, right? They're not measuring us today, they're measuring who we were a decade ago almost. All right, we weren't very good then, surprise, okay? The reality of it is this. We are either going to say that we embrace innovation in higher education and all that comes with it, or we're going to pretend embrace innovation in higher education. This is what actually embracing it looks like, right? It's a willingness to confront the issues that you are dealing with, accepting the consequences that come with those, and say, you know what, we're right. And we are comfortable being on the island by ourselves while we prove ourselves right. So 70% retention rates, we'll be okay with the lagging indicators in a minute.
And you serve a very, very high percentage of Pell Grant recipients.
We do.
It's almost all students, essentially.
The only ones who aren't typically are our Latino students who are undocumented.
Interesting. And I know you have a very hands-on leadership style. In the profile I read, you had reached out to one of the students featured when he was still in high school and had been following him throughout his job over the course of his 4 years. And when he was struggling, you reached out to him. And it sounds like you really do form very intimate relationships with your students.
Well, I don't think that you pick small colleges to be anonymous. Right, like that's not why I picked Oldham. I didn't pick Oldham because I thought, oh, look, I'll be a number, right? People crave personal interaction. And I don't know as a college president how I'm expected to make the best decisions for my students if I don't know my students. So for many of our students, I've gone into their high schools. I've walked their communities. I've met their parents, right? We have a relationship. Because again, if you have to compensate for the economic realities, right? If you attend affluent schools, not only are the parents engaged, but the counselors are engaged. Everyone's engaged. But if you attend an under-resourced school in an under-resourced community, you've got to identify the people who can push those students forward, right? Who will help you retain those students. Because here's the thing, and this is an honest-to-God true story. One of the students that we have lost 3 critical family members in the last month. Okay, in the last month. 0 expected family contribution, Pell Grant eligible. They didn't have the money to send the child home for the funerals. Now, it's his great-grandmother, his uncle, and his brother, right? That's who died. That's a shock for anyone. But it's okay that he's in a place where people can go to his dorm room, put their arms around him, then help him gather the resources to go home. And newsflash, this is what historically black colleges have done forever, right? This is what small colleges do. It's okay. The students need that. We all are going to have a point where we stumble, but we don't have to fall. And whether or not we fall depends upon the support mechanisms that we have. One of my mentors, Dr. Mary Sias, who is here, told us something that I never forgot. She was an advocate for the intrusive retention models for students, right? And that is what we have tried to do, and I just think it's incredibly important.
And Sarita, many Latino students, since Paul Quinn is a historically black college, a lot of them attend Hispanic serving institutions. What do you think is the role of minority serving institutions today, given that the demographics are shifting so quickly? They're not, just specifically targeted at Hispanic students necessarily.
I think it's the role of all institutions of higher education to serve Latino students and all students that they admit. I think the operating principle for institutions is that you make a choice rather than look to your left, look to your right, only one of you. I mean, that's
It's a
traditional.
horrible way of doing things.
That's a traditional thing. I think we need to evolve as a society beyond that. I don't think that gets us great value. And since you asked about Hispanic serving institutions, they're a phenomenon that is a convergence of policy and habits. The policy part is that Congressman Ruben Hinojosa, who is retiring this year, came to Washington at a time that the community of institutions that enrolled larger percentages of Latinos made an argument to the federal government that there should be an investment stream. And unlike HBCUs or tribal colleges, these are by and large institutions that are in the neighborhood. They're institutions that Latino students have made HSIs because they choose to stay home, they're working, they're committed to things in their lives outside of school, and so they concentrate their enrollment. HSIs, I think, have also benefited from the opportunity to compare with other minority-serving institutions and choose whether or not to raise up as an institutional mission to serve. This is something that we're very focused on. Enrolling is important, but enrolling is not ultimately what we're all striving for. It's success, and that means graduating and making their way in life. So I think that the opportunity for all of us, when you sit in a conversation like this, or you're in Washington, D.C., and you're looking across the country, HSIs have to be on everybody's map because they do enroll almost 60% of all the Hispanic students in the country. So if you're simply looking at that, how do I concentrate, how do I connect with this community, what do I do, they should be there. But I do think that this conversation and the energy that is in today's meeting is really about how to go to scale with the kinds of practices that Michael's talking about, with the kinds of practices that many HSIs, particularly those in the first couple of years, have embraced in terms of the role of parents, the role of community, and the tradition. I mean, you only have to go to a graduation at any of these institutions to know what gets unleashed when a student—
family graduation.
Exactly, when the student crosses the stage. And I think that in a policy discussion, in an economic discussion, we have to reserve space for the human part of education. It is a human enterprise.
And if I could just say one thing on behalf of the HSI experience, and this is really on behalf of the 19-20% of our students that are Latinos, it can't just be the flavor of the day, right? I mean, I think it is disrespectful for programs, for schools to create recruiting programs specifically designed to recruit Latino students just so that they can access another pool of resources, right? Like, that's not right. Like, I know what that feels like. I've been a black student recruited by schools that were trying to check a box, right? Like, you have to create environments where cultures are respected, are nurtured, and treated as if what they bring to the table is equally as valuable as everything else you have. And it's just been interesting to us to see how our students have been integrated into the process. I mean, 2 of our last 4 Miss Paul Quinns have been Latinas, right? Both of whom have been undocumented, right? We've had a Latino valedictorian who also was undocumented. So my point is, don't disrespect people's communities by pandering instead of fully embracing.
Very quickly until we go to the audience.
If we're also going to innovate our way out of our problems, I think we have to think about this issue of scaling. I mean, we have as many Pell Grant students at our one institution as the entire Ivy League has first-year students. And to scale, what that's also going to mean is that the innovations that we pursue, I don't think can stay within the walls of our institutions. And we have to figure out that the big places happen when we join forces.
Absolutely.
How we join forces with public schools, how community colleges work with 4 years, and with the private sector. And so I think we have to move to a scaling perspective that gets outside of our institutional borders.
I'm going to open it up to the audience now. Looks like we have a question.
Hi, my name is Veronique, and I'm with Education and Workforce Committee. My question has to do with a report that came out earlier this year from economist Valerie Wilson, which found that regardless of educational attainment, there is continuing a income gap for African Americans, and particularly in Latinos. And so looking at this, I wanted to find out what the panelist has to say about the institutions, kind of addressing some of the institutional biases that exist, both in entering the institutions of higher ed and how they are addressing the employment opportunities, and in entertaining the question whether college is broken and if it's for everyone. Isn't that question in itself somewhat not dealing with the reality that people of color can't really afford that? Is that question in itself really unique for a group of people who've traditionally benefited from the higher ed system, as opposed to people of color who are coming out with degrees but yet not getting the full economic benefit of their value of the degrees? Thanks.
You want to talk about the gap between income and the
Well,
institutional
I would
experience?
I don't know that this is entirely going to answer your question and let others chime in, but this notion of sort of return on investment in higher education, and are you getting that, accessing good opportunities post your post-secondary experience, is something that we at the Chamber have really been thinking a lot about at the Chamber Foundation and working with American Institutes for Research and Gallup, trying to provide real outcomes-based consumer information for young people. And I know that, or for students, not just young people, adults as well. And I know this is something that, policymakers struggle with in terms of data, and that, that longitudinal data that would follow somebody into that connectedness to labor market information. But I think it's so critical, right? I mean, if we want more and more people to access some sort of post-secondary education, we want to provide them real solid information if you're going to make one of the biggest investment decisions of your life. And unfortunately, many in sort of traditional higher ed, so I'll go back to, is it broken? There are many, particularly in the private not-for-profit world, who resist that level of data and transparency around outcomes post-secondary. So I think it's sort of critical in making those decisions about, at the program level, not the institution level, at the program level, what programs provide me good outcomes, what programs have traditionally had success in the workplace with higher salaries, and that kind of.
And which employers are hiring people of color? Because as the question was being formed, I do think that is a real phenomenon. I know of many institutional leaders that seek out working relationships with local employers and do many things to listen carefully to what the employers need and how to adjust their curriculum, how to change their delivery systems, all of that. And I think on a small scale that is working. But when you start to look at larger companies, I mean, we've had a lot of activity over the last year in STEM, looking at computer science, looking at Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a very Anglo area. I mean, there are not many people of color. And there are...
It's Asian. Every speaker before now has said that Asian Americans were people of color. Is Asian Americans, do you count as people of color or not count as people?
Then they are people of color, and I'll be more
Underrepresented
specific.
minorities.
I'll be more specific, and I'll say there are not many Black and Latinos in Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
Welcome.
As an example, this region, the hottest jobs in this region and the hottest in the country is cybersecurity. 11% of the cybersecurity workforce is female, and much smaller percentage would be Latino or African American. And so one of the things we have to do, we have one of the fastest growing cybersecurity programs in the country, but we have to be thoughtful about how we reach out, not to just to non-traditional populations, and that's something that we're trying to do, but I think it's something that's incumbent on us to think not just at the institutional level, but also at that program level, as you were talking about.
And this is part of the reason why we designed the new urban college model, right? And why we designed it to be replicated across the country. Because if you can engage the students earlier and have direct conversations about how you become successful and give them enough opportunities over the course of the 4 years while they're in college to experience that, you can begin to compensate and create a base of experiences which allow them to overcome what they would have normally entered into the workforce without.
Well, thank you to today's panelists. It's great to have you, and this is a fun discussion. Hopefully we can continue the dialogue.
Thank you all. Cheryl,